So this is attempt 2 at this video. During the first attempt, maybe about halfway through, my power went out and I lost my entire recording. I was passionate and energetic and I made no mistakes at all during the recording, so how livid I am right now, I can't describe it in words. Let's just restart it. So there's a lot of misinformation out there about how to calibrate your TV properly, and this comes from people who don't understand TVs and RGB and HDMI standards and all that, and also from the TV manufacturers themselves who give you weird default settings and weird post-processing effects to kind of enhance your image, and all that does is makes the image worse or introduces input lag. So I'm going to show you the definitive way, at least as of 2017, to calibrate your TV for gaming without any sort of post-process effects and still getting a great-looking image that is accurate to what the developers of the games and the makers of the movies want you to see. Now, the TV I'm going to be demonstrating this on is a Hisense 50H8C, and this is not my main TV, it's my bedroom TV. I got it on a great sale. It was like $400 or so. It's a 50-inch 4K TV, and what's interesting about it is that it's able to display HDR images through HDMI. It doesn't display HDR in the full way that the makers of HDR intended you to see it in, but it's able to at least process the image and show it to you without looking washed out and terrible. So, the first thing you should do when you get your TV is to check to see if it supports limited or full RGB range. Now, the vast majority of TVs support limited RGB range, including this one. This one does not have any options for full RGB range. And I think that the naming of full and limited is kind of shitty, and that kind of leads to some of the misconceptions to people, because they think that if they set it to limited that it's not going to look as proper as full, and they wonder, what's the point of limited if full is supposed to look better? Well, that's not the case. I'm not going to go into the technical details, but basically TVs are set to receive limited because it's kind of a relic of older times, while PC monitors have always used full. By the way, this only applies to TV, this calibration here. Monitors use a totally different calibration because they're full RGB range. So what I'm going to be using is the image calibration that is built into the Xbox One. If you have an Xbox One, you can just go into the settings and do this from there if that's one of your inputs. But what I did, and you can check the description for this, is you can go to the description and open these images on web browsers on other consoles of yours and use that to calibrate the image on those different consoles. Now, the reason you would want to do that is because a lot of TVs, including this one, have different distinct settings for each input on the TV. So the settings for 1080p consoles here, when I change this color calibration and all that, it's not going to affect this input. We're going to do that one separately. And it's not going to affect this one. Computer is a whole different deal. Again, that's something that you gotta do a separate thing for. Windows actually has a good built-in calibration thing that's better. It's better to use that if you have that hooked up. So anyways, let's do this. I'm on the Wii U web browser, and the Wii U only supports limited RGB range. And by the way, when I said to check if it supports limited or full, set your TV to limited, because there are a lot of devices that only support limited RGB range, including the Wii U here, and many Blu-ray and DVD players. They'll only support limited. And if you hook up a device that is only sending out a limited signal to a TV that is supposed to accept full, what you get is a washed out image with very light gray looking blacks and kind of darkish whites and just washed out colors, and it just doesn't look good. So set the TV to limited if that's something that is required. So here's what we're going to do. What we need to do, and it says so right on the text there, is what we need to do is adjust the brightness so that eye disappears. The closed eye on the left disappears, or just disappears. Now, I want you to take note at the settings here for the standard built-in settings. You have brightness at around like 50, contrast at 50, color 50, aspect ratio wide. So the first thing you do, after of course checking what your TV supports, turn off overscan. Turn off all these crappy post-processing effects. So sharpness, off. Ultra smooth motion, definitely turn that off. Noise reduction, off. Adaptive contrast, off. You may notice that just made the TV look even more washed out. We'll fix that. Now here's an interesting one. Trust me on this. Set this to a warm color temperature. You may be thinking when you first change it, oh, that looks so crappy. That looks yellowish and shitty. Well, most color calibration done for movies and games alike is done with a warm color palette. And if you don't believe me, take a look at the Wii U gamepad. Notice how the colors kind of match what the TV is? The Wii U gamepad is calibrated to a warm color temperature, so is the Switch's screen and many other pre-calibrated screens. Keep it at warm. Trust me, when you get used to the warm color calibration, going to like standard or cool is just going to look terrible. These two things you need professional equipment to do properly, so I would just ignore those for now. The next thing you need to do is go to brightness, and again, make sure your Wii U isn't like asleep or whatever you're using so that the brightness is normal. Is you got to turn the brightness down until that eye on the left just disappears out of sight. So for me, that's around 20. Then what you need to do is set the contrast up to be higher. And you notice how there's those little marks, like right here? For a limited TV with RGB range, you want to set that so that there's pretty much no distinct color blocks. You can kind of see how there's color blocks, like distinct steps between each color. You want to make sure that there's nothing outside those steps. So that's for my TV around 86, which is right before that last block disappears. I'm actually probably going to lower that just a little bit, maybe to like 84. Now you notice the eye came back, so we're going to have to go down even lower. So 15 is where we get the eye. It probably doesn't show up on camera, but for me, the eye is almost all the way disappeared. You can just kind of see the outline. And I'm going to move it up just a little bit, maybe to like 16. So that's perfect. You can just kind of see the eye, because you don't want to lose all your detail. So now what you see is a well-calibrated image. You get the proper steps. You get distinct steps inside those markers there. And it's not too washed out, and it's not too bright on the whites. Look at how different those numbers are compared to the built-in numbers that came with the TV. 16 and 85 versus 50 and 50. And that right there is the reason why when people set their TV to a limited RGB range and turn off all those like adaptive contrast effects, that's why the TV ends up looking crappy. Because they don't have the brightness and contrast set properly. They have them pretty much in the middle, and that washes out the image and makes it look crappy. So yeah, 1585 is roughly what I usually set mine to. 16 might be good, just to get that detail. The next thing you want to do is we'll go to another tab for this, and this is also built into the Xbox One's color setup, is you want to adjust the colors so that there's no bleeding whatsoever, no color bleed, and no over saturation of the colors. And I'm going to show you how to do that real quick. So this is the color calibration menu built into the Xbox One, and that you can use if you go to the description and again and open it on your web browser on any consoles you're using to set this up. And what you need to do here is adjust your color so that there's no bleeding between the colors. Usually the default settings on the TV aren't too bad, but as you can see here, there's a little bit of bleeding between the blue and the red. You can kind of see some red just getting yourself in the blue. A little bit of magenta seeking into the green there. So I'm going to lower it down to about 40. And that actually pretty much just fixed the color bleeding problems. There's pretty much no bleeding whatsoever just from fixing that. It's not perfect. Again, you need professional color calibration equipment to kind of really perfect this, but you don't want some overblown colors. And finally, our last step we're going to do is some non-contrast and brightness stuff. So first things first, aspect ratio. Set it to direct or original or source or whatever. You don't want to do any sort of weird, aspect ratios. So for example, if you go into the Wii menu on the Wii U and you have it set to like wide, it'll stretch out the image a little weirdly. And you also want to go to your backlight, and if your TV has high quality local dimming that's actually good, keep it on, but for this TV it's not that great, so just turn it off. Your backlight, that's up to you. Like if you want it to be darker because it's light out, that doesn't actually affect the picture. Eco sensor, turn that all off, unless you want auto brightness. Again, doesn't really affect the picture at all. So that's it for this, and I'm going to kind of demonstrate with the Switch what happens when you have the full RGB range set on a properly calibrated TV. Give it a second to come up here. So here's the Switch. And as you can see, I have it set to full RGB, which as you can see, there's no circles around these options here. So let's go to here, go to our TV settings, set it to limited. Boom, and there's the detail you're supposed to have. And if you actually take the system out of the dock and look at the switches, like the switch's own screen, you'll notice that the brightness and contrast are very, very close to what the switch's screen is supposed to look like. In fact, in the fast remix icon there, you get just a little bit of the detail on the front of that middle cart there, and you get to see the circles around the options here. So that's a properly calibrated image, but you need to do this for every single device or every input you have, because different devices may be different in terms of how they interpret each color. The PS3 and Wii U are actually all pretty similar. The Xbox 360 is a little wonky, and I actually wouldn't recommend calibrating this using the 360's web browser. Use a PS3, a Wii U, or even the TV's built-in, if it has a built-in web browser. Hook up a laptop, anything but the 360, because that thing has a broken color range option set up. So I wouldn't use that. So let's do this with the PS4 and see what happens on the PS4, because the PS4 is an HDR compliant system, so that may change things a little bit. So let's do that and compare the numbers at the end of a calibration. Alright, so the first thing you want to do on the PS4 is go to your settings, go to sound and screen, video output, and make sure the RGB is set to limited. It has to match the TV, and like I said, the TV should be set to the limited mode. And as I said, this TV supports HDR, so you want to set it to YUV420, HDR to automatic, deep color output to automatic. And that deep color output, by the way, is one of the reasons why the color calibration may be different on the PS4. If you're doing this on a standard TV with no HDR, the calibration from the Wii U will probably work just fine. I would do it separately anyways, just to make sure. And as you can see, HDR on your TV, 2K, 4K supported. Yeah, that's all good. So let's go to the calibration images and recalibrate using the Ps4 settings. Again, the settings we had set for the 1080p consoles, like the Switch and the Wii U, is under here. The PS4 is going to have a separate config on this TV. Alright, so here's the same exact images opened up on the PS4. Again, if you have an Xbox One, you can just go into the video settings and get these images right off of there, and you can just do this right from your Xbox One without having to use the web browser. So again, first thing, you go to your picture mode, out of your options. I'm going to do these settings first, so local dimming off, advanced picture settings, we're going to turn all of this crap off. Post-processing just ruins the image again and makes you lose detail and gets input lag. So smooth motion off, noise reduction off, adaptive contrast off, color temperature warm, you want that, and then we ignore these. Alright. So brightness, we're going to do the same thing here, we're going to do the same thing. So we want to adjust the brightness until the eye just disappears. So on here, that's actually around 35, so we set it to 36. Now we fix the contrast, just raise that until the block next to the marker there just disappears, then you move that back. So on here it's around like 63. And then you want to readjust that, the brightness, bring that down just a little bit. So 33 is when it disappears, 34 is when it's just slightly back, so 35 is good. So 35 and 63 or 64 is actually a little better for this TV. Now let's go to the color output and see how that looks. So on here, there's definitely quite a bit of color bleed. We'll move that back. So 40 actually looks pretty good on this input too. There's a little bleed, but if you bring it too low, then the colors just don't exist at all. So notice these numbers are very different from the input on the standard devices such as the Wii U, the Switch, the PS3, and I guess slightly the 360. It's definitely different. Now notice how my aspect ratio option here is grayed out, and that's because the PS4 has its own distinct options for its aspect ratio that it communicates with the TV, so the TV is not going to let me change that, I guess. No overscan, nothing like that. Okay, so that's a properly calibrated TV. And you'll notice that even when you have the TV set to a limited color range, which you may think would be worse if you have some cognitive dissonance, but it actually looks a lot better, because when you set it to full on any of these devices, if it supports it, and then it's just going to look washed down, you're going to lose a lot of detail. So let's go back over to the Switch. and take a look and see just one more time, again, how that comes out when you set it to full RGB range. So TV settings, full, and again, even on my end, you cannot see the circles surrounding these icons. The colors are just way too saturated, just too bright. You lose a lot of detail. But when you go back to TV settings and do limited, it looks much better. So that's how you properly calibrate a TV. Again, go to the description. Those are where the images are. You can load them up on a USB stick on your TV, bring them up on one of your console's web browsers, which is the way I recommend doing it for each input, and just calibrate your TV properly. You'd be surprised how much better the image will look, and you won't have to have any of these post-processing crap effects on. And you also have more accurate colors, because a lot of people like to set their TV to standard or cool, when in reality you should be setting it to warm. Anyways, I hope you found this tutorial pretty helpful. I know it was a little bit shoddy and thrown together, but this was my second attempt because of the power outage the first time. Let me know how your TV's set up in the comments, and remember what I said about computer monitors is you don't do this same thing for computer monitors, because those are different, especially when you have a IPS monitor, which is definitely very different in terms of calibration. You want to use Windows' built-in calibration tool, and you want to use calibration images for full range RGB. And if you connect like the Switch or the Ps4 or any devices that can switch between the two modes over to a computer monitor, you need to make sure it's set to full, and also make sure your computer's set to full, because if your monitor supports it, and pretty much all monitors only support that, that's what you should have it set to. You want to make sure that the source and the final TV or display match settings with each other. So one isn't necessarily superior over the other, but you want to make sure they match. Anyways, you guys have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you on the next video.